of the presentation that she's going to do. I think it's very important for us to get it because we're talking about mental health and trauma.
Amen.
And so she is an expert in that field, and I'm sure that you will get something from this presentation in Jesus' name.
Amen.
And do you all give her a Bible way welcome? With that, she's going to get started because we're not set for this. And so she's going to start, and you all are going to get some good stuff.
Good morning, friends.
Good morning.
All right, we don't need visuals. This is the lecture for you guys. I am hot off of a workshop as of last night. Hot and cold. That's better. Now I want to yell at you. Good morning.
Good morning.
For those of you who don't know me, which is everybody in this room, I think, except for Pastor Elliott, my name is Nicolle Wargo-Boswell. We're going to talk about trauma today. I'm not going to lie. When a colleague of mine, who knows that I do workshops like this, reached out and said, hey, we got a pastor looking for someone to talk about trauma. I said, no, you don't. No, you don't. Because, friends, the work that I do, we're going to get more into this, is I specialize in trauma. But my overall specialty right now is in religious trauma, cult recovery, and church hurt. So the folks I work with would not invite me into a church to talk about mental health. And to be completely honest, the folks and people I've had experiences with, I understand why. So you can imagine what I was feeling. I said, there's a church who cares about people's mental health. I mention that because I want you to understand that your leaders are worth their weight in gold. Because they care about your mental health. Because I work with a lot of folks who do not have that experience. So thank you for Pastor Elliott for having that conversation with me. Thank you for the board for letting me be here because, again, not what I expected when a colleague of mine said, hey, is this something you can do? So today we're going to talk about trauma in the body. We're going to understand it, where it comes from, and then Pastor Elliott gave me some very clear indicators. We're going to have some call to actions today because I want you to be able to go home today, this afternoon, tonight, not only with you, but with your family members, and be able to do things that are very practical so that you can start soothing that nervous system. So that if you happen to have a history of trauma, you are not a victim, but you are a survivor. And we're going to start treating that. And it all starts with you. Okay? And that's coming from someone who's a therapist, who does this work in a very sacred space. It starts with you at home. Any workshop I do, I always start a little bit about me, the lens, so that we can all be on a level playing field so you can understand why I do the work that I do. I'm a licensed professional counselor here in Connecticut, but I did not start here in Connecticut. Originally was licensed in Max in downtown Springfield, and before that, I was a missionary to Cambodia. I was actually a pastor for a really long time. Okay? I have a degree in theology. I lived and studied in Jerusalem, studying ancient Koine Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew, being part of archaeological digs.
Wow.
I worked with human trafficking survivors in Cambodia.
Oh, wow.
I worked with child brides in India. And I made my way back here in the United States because I knew, these things that I was seeing around the world were happening right here in my own backyard. I'm a daughter of a Marine. We served 21 years. We moved 19 times with the family. And that comes with a lot of trauma in and of itself. I watched my mom support him through some substance abuse. Again, a lot of trauma, a lot of generational trauma. So I don't do this work just because I read some stuff out of a textbook or because I paid a lot of money for degrees and licensure. I do this because I needed it. I needed to understand. And this is something I will also share with my clients. They know I'm a survivor of trauma because I'm not going to sit here on my high horse and make believe and think that I have the answers to everything. I've been there. I've done the work. I know how hard it is. I know what it's like to wake up in the morning and say, why? With all of that, I own my own practice, pursuing hope counseling. much of what I believe in pursuing hope in your life is if we don't have hope, what do we have? I'm up in Somers, Connecticut now, but I've worked in Bloomfield school systems. I've done in-home. I've done higher levels of care. I started off my career working solely with children and families, human trafficking survivors here in Connecticut and Massachusetts, because yes, we have a sex trade group right on 91 going from Hartford to Springfield. Okay. I worked in a lot of DCF cases where horrific things happen that you don't even hear about on the news, but it's happening. By the time somebody turns 21, and this is just Connecticut statistics, okay? In the state of Connecticut, the stats show, again, pre-COVID, that by the time a young person turns 21, they have already experienced at least 4 traumas, 4 indicated traumas by then, and that's Connecticut. I'm also certified in low energy neurofeedback. If we have enough time, we'll get into a little bit what that is, but I connect sensors to people's heads or bodies to help reorganize the nervous system to create some healing, especially if there's not extensive trauma and talk therapy isn't enough, medication's not enough. I'm a clinical instructor, so I go around to Connecticut, Massachusetts, New England, and I do workshops for licensed therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors, so they can understand the current studies of what we're seeing on the topics of trauma, neurodivergence, so different brain types, and I also help them build ethical private practices because there's too much shady business out there and I won't be a part of it. Okay? I say all that because I am an expert in trauma. I mean that. I've lived it. I've studied it. It's encompassed my life. I am a trauma survivor, not just with the things that I've experienced in my life, but overseas. Being able to survive terrorist attacks, on-campus shootings. Once had to escape a human trafficking ring myself. Again, I don't say these things because we don't compare traumas. I'm going to tell you why. Because our brain and body decides what's traumatic. We don't. So a few things before I go deeply in. At any point, if you have a question, raise your hand, say, hey, Nicolle, I have a question. I do not mind being interrupted. This is your time and I want to use it to the fullest, okay? If the answer to that question is going to be in a little bit, I'll let you know. This is a heavy topic, talking about trauma. Okay? So if you need to take a break and stand up and walk out, that's okay. I will not be offended. I tell therapists the same thing. Even yesterday morning when I was giving a workshop, I told therapists, if you need to take a break from this, even though you know this, you treat this, take a break. Because the best way to heal trauma is to start taking inventory of your brain and body. How are you physically reacting? So I have my first call to action for you folks. If you have an iPhone, you're gonna open up to your notes and we're gonna start making some notes. If you like pen and paper, I've got little books up here. If you want one, let me know. I can start passing them around. Because this is our first call to action. This is something I teach therapists. This is something I teach clients. I even do for myself. As I'm going through things today, if you hear something, maybe your heart starts pounding, your hands get a little sweaty, if you just start feeling like you have the urge to move, you can't sit still, whatever your baseline is, if it is different, I need you to write down what's going on, what's happening to your body, and maybe a little bit what we were talking about in that moment, because this is how you first start working through trauma. You recognize your body's response, your physical response. If you even down to, friends, if your thoughts start racing, they feel a little jumbled, maybe you're a mom and you're thinking about Thanksgiving dinner next week, I want you to write that down. Because there's a reason why your brain and body are trying to redirect to a different topic, okay? This is where we start. And I'm gonna give you some tools as we go through this, as to how you can then respond to those body responses, okay? And as for the stories I'm going to share today to help us, because I'm a visual learner, I understand best through storytelling. Any stories I do tell today, I do have full permission from folks to share those things, but I will be taking names and protecting people, because that's my job. So, the way this is going to work today, I'm going to go through understanding trauma, what it is, what our stress responses are to trauma and why, how it shows up in the body, maybe daily life, right? We're gonna talk a little bit about generational trauma, the impact of relational trauma, because that is a very real thing, behaviors and symptoms from the caregivers that were before us do get passed down generationally. We know that now. Don't let anyone tell you any different. We know that now. And then we're going to do some hands-on practices. And we're practicing something called progressive muscle relaxation because Pastor Elliott was very clear. We're going to do call to actions today. I'm going to give you some real-life practical application as to how you can respond to these things when you go home today. So to start, I'm going to open up with a quote by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He is our father, I guess, in the psychology realm of trauma. He wrote the book, The Body Keeps Score. I have a slide at the end of this. You guys are, Pastor, you're more than welcome at the end to share these slides, but just note that they are for your own personal use. But I have additional resources at the end. Even if you want to take a screenshot and email it to people, it's just books if you want to read up more. Even local stuff that you can probably participate in if you want to further treat any sort of trauma history. If you know somebody in your life that might be helpful for, okay? But he is quoted as saying, it boggles my mind, only up until the early 2000s, that no one made the connection that the body keeps score, the body remembers. The brain might not remember what's happened to us, but the body, physical body, is going to remember. And he is quoted as saying, we have learned that trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past. It is also an imprint that is left by an experience on the mind, brain, and body. I know that because, right, us in the field, therapists, we use something called the DSM. That's our diagnostic material. We use it here in the United States. It's used globally as to how we diagnose people. And in 1952, we had the DSM-1. And back then, there was not a PTSD diagnosis. It was called shell shock or gross stress reaction, meaning that there was a large response to stress. And typically, in order to get that diagnosis, the only way you could get it is if you had experienced some sort of combat. So we know, right? People experience physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental, emotional abuse, but that did not matter. You didn't experience combat, so how could that be trauma? And the word trauma in the United States, and typically around the world, wasn't even something that folks were able to focus on. It was a lot of stress. But we started to do a little bit better, right? By the time 1980 came around, we had finally the PTSD diagnosis, but guess what? Once again, it was a response to Vietnam. You can only experience trauma if you had experienced combat. Again, we were leaving out a whole population of people who've had some real hurt, right? Then we move on to 1994. We had, it's called acute stress disorder. Again, we're working with that word stress. I don't know why nobody wants to use the word trauma, the big T word. It scares folks a lot of the time. And then finally, right, 2013, the DSM-5, which right now we're on DSM-5, the revised version. It came out 2 years ago, the revised version. And it said, hey, yeah, you can have PTSD. You don't have to have experienced combat. But also, guess what? Children and adolescents can have trauma. And it boggles my mind that it took that long for practitioners, medical professionals in the mental health field to finally come together and say, yes, this, we can give access to everyone. And it wasn't, and this, again, it still boggles my mind that only up until 2 years ago, so only 2 years ago, we had the revised version come out. They said you can experience trauma because of grief. I don't know about you, friends, but I've experienced grief before. That's traumatic. We are still currently fighting, just so you guys are aware, because I believe education, there is power. Us in the field are fighting for something called complex PTSD, meaning if you have experienced something reoccurring, right? So I'm thinking about those folks, like I'm going to use my dad as an example, who would go home. His mom, if she was upset, by the time dad came home and lined up the kids, she wasn't mentally well herself and would come up with things that the kids did so that they could get a beating with a closed fist. This was daily. And when you're experiencing trauma daily, that goes beyond PTSD. That's complex PTSD. Or what about the folks, kids I've worked with where not only maybe did they experience a loss, have something happen to them, whether it be sexually or physically, they also experienced a house fire. Those are multiple traumas in one person's life. That is complex. That is not just PTSD, it goes beyond that. And why is that important? Because we have insurance companies that combat this, that say, no, they don't need treatment, they're good. But that's what we're fighting for right now. So I share that with you so that you can have that education and know that that's what's going on in the background. And you can also advocate for yourselves. So what is trauma? And I teach this to my graduate students. I teach at a graduate program and a doctoral program in neurobiology of trauma. And this is the simplest way I can describe it. Trauma is any experience. We do not get to decide what the experience is. It is any experience that our nervous system, so our brain and body, decide, I am not safe, I'm in danger. That's what trauma is. So it can be smaller incidences, and again, I don't need to say this as if I'm minimizing anything, like a singular accident, car accident, right? It can be physical abuse. It can be smaller repeated incidences, right? So I have some clients who maybe they work in a hostile work environment, and every day they go into work and they have a boss that is really, really getting on them. Believe it or not, the brain and body can see that as danger. That's trauma. The brain and body decide what is traumatic, okay? So I want you to start thinking right now. Again, this is another call to action. If you need to step out, that's fine, but start thinking. What types of stressors or traumas have you experienced in your life that could have impacted you? And that's not to say, and I've met with some folks where they've experienced some stuff, but they don't have a reaction to it. Back when I was living in Cambodia and I was working with human trafficking survivors, there was one summer where, from a mosquito bite, I contracted something called dengue fever. And by the time I was able to make it back to the United States, I was quarantined over at Bay State Hospital. Doctors looked at my parents. I was only like 18 years old at the time and said, you need to start making some preparations. All we can do is give her morphine. She might have $48. Now, I never had to process any of it, right? Never did. And then COVID came along. A disease that we didn't know about from Southeast Asia. Oh, was my brain and body on fire when we went into lockdown. So I say that because there could have been an experience that you've had in your life, and it might not be something that you're processing now, but do not be surprised if there is a time in your life where it does come up. And let's say, you know, I used to work with a lot of siblings. Let's say you have a sibling and you guys experience something together growing up in a family. It might not have impacted you like it did your brother or your sister. That can happen because their brain and body was protecting them in a different way than it was you. So if you have a strong reaction to it, but your sibling doesn't, that does not mean there is anything wrong with you. It is just your brain and body decided this is dangerous. But for them, it didn't. And I'm going to get into a little bit as to why that is, because I want you to understand what's going on in the brain too, okay? So I say a lot because we do not get to choose our reaction. Our brain does that for us. So I never want you to think that there is something wrong with you, that you did something wrong. Your brain that was created for you, that is in your body, gets to decide how it's going to protect itself, okay? It's nothing you did wrong. Nothing you did wrong. Yes?
Hi, can I share something?
Absolutely.
So I feel like I was at a job for many years, and I feel like the last 2 years I was like heavily overly, I should say, micromanaged and like controlled to the point where when I, moved out and went to another position, like even just driving to work, if I was like a minute late or something, I felt myself like getting stressed out, breathing, like, oh my God. And I had to like talk to myself like, you're not at this other place anymore. It's not like that anymore. You don't have to feel stressed. You don't have to feel rushed. Like nobody's writing down the time you come in and go. You don't have to check in and out on every little thing. So it was like I felt like I had PTSD coming from that severe situation, and it took time to like, bring my body down from that, because like I said, I was feeling stressed and like, oh my God, they're gonna, she's gonna, say, why are you late or why? And it was nothing like that, but I was carrying that from where I came from. So again, I had to like talk to myself like, you're not there anymore. It's not like that anymore. They're not watching you like that. They're not trying to control you like that. So I felt like, you know what I mean? Like my body was just like going through, and I'm like, what is happening to me? So that was traumatic for me, and I didn't realize it until I came out of it and then looked back. Like I said, because the way my body was reacting, like, why am I so stressed? I'm gone. I'm not there. Nobody's controlling me anymore. You're free. Like,
Yes.
So, but my body was still reacting to it.
Oh, I just had
So it took
truth bumps.
Yeah, it
right?
took
Yeah.
time to come out of that and then finally feel like, okay.
No,
like,
I appreciate you sharing that, because that is the perfect example of the body keeping score, the body remembering. Your brain, yourself, in that moment knows, I'm not in that same space.
yeah.
But because there are reminders and it's all related to the work environment, the brain is now going to relate it to, no, I'm not safe.
Yeah.
I'm not safe. And again, our brain is what decides what's safer. What is it? Yes, sir. Right in the back.
Is it possible that,
No.
is it possible that stress and trauma can work together in the same instance and not just one versus the other?
Oh, absolutely. So when I'm talking about stress and trauma, usually I'm using the words interchangeably, because what we know now, and you give me a few minutes, I'm going to explain as to why. The hormone that's being created and being produced in our brain and body does not see it differently. It's not categorizing, ooh, we're in a high stress situation versus I'm actually not safe. I'm going to get into a little bit as to why that is. And this is why it's so important, right? And this is part of the work I do, what a lot of therapists do, is recognizing what our stress responses are, right? So like one of mine, and it took a lot of work to figure this out, is if my stomach starts to feel even slightly acidic, I know something about where I'm at does not make me feel safe. And it can be anything, friends. Think about your five senses. What you smell, what you hear, what you feel, what you touch. I once had a client I was doing a formal trauma model with, and mom couldn't figure out why. She was so reactive sometimes during dinner. It was like a hit or miss. Couldn't figure out why. Until finally, we started really doing good work on her body responses and when it was happening. We really had to document when it was happening, not so that we can avoid things, but so that I can give her tools as to how she can feel safer. When we narrowed it down, we found that whenever mom, the nights that she was making rice and beans, was when she responded, because that poor little girl was getting sexually assaulted in the home by a family member the night that it happened. Mom was making dinner. So when she smelled what was traditionally something mom always cooked, that was no longer safe, because it brought her back to that moment. Now, I wasn't going to sit there and tell mom, you can't make this anymore. Because while I like to learn about our trauma responses, I'm also very practical. We got to keep living, friends. We can't stop living.
Amen.
There is power in knowing how we're responding, but there's even more power in working through it, in doing the good for our brain and body.
So you're saying the will has power
Oh, absolutely.
in situations and utilizing that power,
Absolutely, sir.
the will, perseverance, and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff
Now,
is key.
while it does, right, I'm not going to sit here and say you always need to use willpower, right? Because some of the folks that I'm seeing, when we're first starting off, if they've never had any sort of treatment, if we're talking about very extreme trauma histories, I'm only gonna push so much, because my job is to do no harm. My job is not to re-traumatize. Now, that's not to say, are there therapists out there, are there practitioners out there who do some harm? Absolutely. No one's perfect in any of the fields. But that's where also part of my work is to help advocate, so that does not happen. And that's why I educate therapists, so that we're not doing that. Because willpower, having hope, working through stuff, that's powerful work.
And I'm also talking about belief,
Yeah,
faith.
yeah.
You're welcome.
Talk about faith, belief, will, the desire, and all of that in terms of getting through some things that have happened that we had no power or control over.
Yeah, absolutely. And what the beautiful thing is, if there's anything if there's something that we can get out of today, it's this, that every person is different. Everyone's nervous system is wired in a different way. So while some folks that I work with can absolutely lean on faith, they can lean on willpower, they can lean on hope to help them push through and do some good work, I also recognize that that's not for everyone, and we have to work our way up there. Right?
Amen. Amen.
It's all about knowing where you're at and doing what works for you. One of the things I'm always teaching therapists, I'm always teaching my own clients, is we work with our brain and body, not against it. So if something might work for a friend or a family member, some sort of treatment or skill, if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. That does not mean there's something wrong with you. It just means you need something a little different. And that's perfectly fine. So trauma, right? It's stored in the body and the brain. And our nervous system is going to respond in 4 ways. Usually, and I'm sure some of you have heard about this, is fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
If I come across a bear in the woods, I'm either going to try to fight my way out or I'm going to run away. That's the old way of thinking. We know that there are now 4 responses. And to be honest, a lot of practitioners are still only teaching 3 of them. Even my graduate students, my doctoral students, I'm having to force to get them to learn the 4th because it's that new as of probably a year ago. So we have a freeze response, that's number 3. Okay? Freeze meaning, and if you've ever experienced this, you're not crazy. Something happens and you get frozen. You do not know how to react. Because here's the thing, if you do not feel safe, if your brain and body do not feel safe, you do not have the ability to think. We know that. I'm going to get into in my next few minutes as to why, what's happening biochemically, okay? And then we have a 4th one, fawning. Think of a baby deer, a little baby fawn. I see this one a lot, especially generationally. If I can people please, if I can appease the people in my life, if they're an abuser, I'm safe. I'm going to go under the radar. Makes me think of a lot of the women in my family. I see this a lot generationally. If I just do what my mother or grandmother wants, I'm going to go under the radar. I'm just going to appease them. Doesn't matter how unsafe I feel, but that is a protective factor, friends. Okay? So fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I like to bring up freeze too. So if you are a student or if you have any kids who are students, anybody who's taking any sort of large exam recently, there's a reason why if you've spent weeks, months, years studying for something, you get that test in front of you, your brain goes blank.
Yeah.
It's a freeze response. That's a trauma response. Okay? What's going on is when we don't feel safe, it's called the parasympathetic nervous system is being reacted. What we want to do is get into the sympathetic nervous system. We want to get into that phase that it's called rest and digest, because if I can rest and digest, that means I'm safe. So if you're ever able to be at home and feel cozy, eat some dinner, your body feels safe. Even if there are some stressors going on, that's how I like to redirect us. Ooh, there's still parts of me that feel safe right now. If you ever want to shut people out and shut down, I see this a lot with teens. I'm going to go into my room, get everything dark. Yes, it can be typical. They don't want to be around family. We're not cool anymore. But when there's extremes, that's called the dorsal vagal nerve kicking in. And it actually takes far more energy and stress from your body to shut out and shut down than it does to fight or flight or not. So how do these things show up in everyday life? We have the physical responses, right? Some of the things I told you to write down. Muscle tension, headaches, huge one, especially for women, right? The amount of women I have worked with, they've gone to doctor after doctor, and there's no answers. Usually that's when I'll get a referral from a doctor saying, hey, it might be called what they call psychosomatic. But then that's my job to come in and say, let's make sure that that's the case. Digestive issues, believe it or not. Fatigue, rapid heart rate, sweat palms. I'll even have clients focus on their breath. Do you ever get like shallow breathing during the day? It might not just be because we're a little bit out of shape, friends. It might be that we're so exhausted, we feel so unsafe, that the body creates shallow breath. It's a protective factor. There's emotional side as well. Anxiety. I see this one more so with men, irritability. Because if I can be irritable, if I can be angry, who wants to be around me? I'm protecting myself. I also think when I was working in the Bloomfield school systems, I would get called down to a classroom, there was a little kid throwing desks. My question isn't what's wrong with him, my question is what happened to him. So he has such a big stress response that he needs to throw desks in a classroom to feel safe. That's fight, friends. It comes out young. Emotional numbness, not feeling anything, depression, feeling on edge. They're trauma responses. Behavior, startled responses, close a cabinet a little bit too loudly, always jumping. Avoidance is a huge one. Not just because we don't like to do something, but avoidance can happen because our brain and body is telling us, if we avoid this, we're safe. We're safe. Difficulty concentrating, believe it or not, that's another stress response to trauma. And then overall difficulty regulating emotions. Maybe you have that person that you've met in your life or a family member, like, oh, you never know who's gonna walk through the door. Jekyll or Hyde, who's it gonna be today? Who's it gonna be? This is where I also see a lot of folks who will come into my office and they get misdiagnosed with things like bipolar disorder because the moods switch so often. That does not mean it's bipolar disorder, friends. Bipolar disorder is actually an incredibly rare diagnosis. Because no one stopped to ask, what happened to you? What happened to you? See, just rephrasing that questioning really changes the landscape for us. Okay? I've also been seeing folks where they're like, Nicolle, when I go home, I just can't relax. Sure, it can be a neurotype thing, ADHD, autism, it's one of my other specialties, but if you can't relax at home and your brain and body aren't allowing you to relax, again, what happened to you? It probably wasn't necessarily in the home you are in now, the place you're renting, the place you bought, but what happened to you when you were younger? My other question usually, and we're gonna get a little bit more into this one, is what happened to your caregivers? Trauma's generational, friends, we know that now. We know that there is DNA encoding that can pass down trauma generationally. Yes, ma'am?
Is there epigenetics?
So epigenetics is a little different. I'm glad you asked this. I wasn't going into it, but we'll go into epigenetics. So epigenetics is the study of DNA and the intersect of trauma. So essentially, in the large scheme of things, if someone has a trauma history, right, our DNA encoding, we're still learning so much about it, but we can have, like, when you go to the physician, they'll ask you, do you have a family history of cancer, heart disease, asthma, diabetes, all of this, because we know, right, that things can pop up later in life. Now, why would an adult, let's say who's virtually healthy, go their entire life and all of a sudden they get to their 30s, 40s, and 50s and now they have diabetes or asthma? Yes, there can be environmental issues, but if we ask what happened to you and there was some sort of trauma that was never dealt with, I like to think of epigenetics as the light switch turning on and the body going, all right, now those DNA codes that are holding on to that family history, maybe certain diseases or diagnoses, they're being turned on essentially. Now, there are other DNA codings, right? And this only came out, it was right before COVID. There was a study done on the Irish potato famine, and they've offshooted to look at other cultures and society. And what they found was folks who were able to link their lineage back to the Irish potato famine found higher risk issues of epigenetics, those diseases just being turned on essentially. We're on the slide, trauma and the body continued. I got you. Those things get turned on, right? And what they found was folks who were able to link their lineage back had higher risk of mental health issues, were probably, were also at higher risk of mental health issues. Maybe they were more quickly to respond to things in a negative way, higher symptoms of anxiety, depression, but they also found some other issues too, because, right, thinking Irish potato famine, developmentally, you're not going to hit milestones like you would because you're not getting the nutrition you need. They were able to link that back to hundreds of years before. And when it makes me think of what are some of the atrocities our world has experienced, we're all victims of generational trauma because it's something that happened to us. What happened to us? We even know now, thanks to studies, that there are trauma responses prenatally. So if mom is pregnant, okay, maybe she experienced something before pregnancy or during. That stress response, the hormone that's released is called cortisol, can impact that baby. Baby didn't ask for that, mom didn't ask for that, but I say these things not so that it scares us, so that it empowers us, so that we are more apt to respond and take care of our brains and bodies. You can go to the next one. So one of the biggest things I teach is called the window of tolerance. Can we go to the next slide? Here we go. Ooh, I'm excited because I was trying to figure out how I would draw this for you guys so you all can see it. Hot off the press, I actually just taught this to a group of therapists yesterday, because there are a lot of therapists that don't know or understand this. So one of the most important things I tell folks, and if there's something that, again, that you are going to do today, it is try to figure out what your window of tolerance is, okay? Ideally, what we want to be is in what's called the optimal zone. This is where we're regulated, we're connected, we're present, we're feeling safe and secure, okay? When we start to get out of that optimal zone, we're going to go one way or the other. We're either going to be up there in the hypoarousal phase, that's our fight or flight. Think of it as our body is reacting. It has to have a visceral reaction. Energy is coming out, okay? This is where we'll see anxiety, panic attacks, irritability, racing thoughts, hypervigilance, or physical fighting. Hypoarousal, so that was the one I was actually mentioning, where it actually takes more energy for your body to go in that hypoarousal state by impacting our dorsal vagal nerve. This is where we're going to freeze, we're going to shut out, we're going to shut down, numbness, dissociation, fatigue, okay? How do you find this? Well, this is where we make notes, whether it's in a notebook, a journal. I'll have clients, especially my young adults, I'll say, you always have your phone on you, okay? You create a note in your phone just for yourself. And when you start feeling fight or flight, hyperarousal, you notate what is that response and what was going on, focusing on those 5 senses so you can start making some notes. Not to avoid, but so that we can have a call to action as to how to respond. I don't want you to start to think of stress or trauma as something to avoid and push down. Stress and trauma is something that we respond to. We don't push it down, we respond to it. The way I teach therapists, the way I teach clients is, how do I soothe my nervous system? How do I soothe the brain and body? So we make notes so that we can figure out for ourselves what is the most soothing. So for that student who's in a classroom, right, and he's throwing chairs, he's throwing desks, yeah, I want him to stop, it's a safety issue. But we're gonna take him aside and we're gonna go, okay, well, what was going on right before that happened? Teacher was yelling at me. Who else yells at you? Come to find out, stepdad wasn't just yelling at home. He was beating. So what does his brain and body think when he hears yelling? It immediately shuts down. He's not safe. He's got to keep himself safe. And the way he can do that in a classroom with little kids who are the same size as him is throwing desks and chairs. He can't do that against a grown man at home, but he can do it in the classroom. So we have a conversation with the teacher. How do we soothe your nervous system so that you're not always yelling? We're doing things different now, friends, because of the access of the education that we have now, okay? Hypoarousal. This is when where I work with teens and parents, you know, she comes in, she shuts out, she shuts down, she never wants to be around the family. Okay, I talk to a teen, what's going on in the day? Why are you white knuckling it through your day where you feel that the second you walk in your house, where maybe you feel the safest and securest is in your bedroom with the lights closed, under your covers in your bed? What's happening? Not so that we can avoid, but so that we can navigate better, okay? So you start making those notes. Remember your 5 senses? How are you reacting? Because we want to get to, if we can soothe the nervous system, we can feel safe, we can immediately get into that optimal zone, okay? One of the easiest ways, if you're feeling dysregulated, especially, right, we're going to have a lot of overwhelming, overstimulating times with holidays coming up. You invite your aunt, who said that she was going to bring all the dessert, she brings no dessert. That's a real good thing, when you don't follow through, right? What you can do, go to your kitchen, get a glass of water. Cold, warm, whatever you feel like. I want you to gargle it. Gargle water. The reason being is we have a vagus nerve sitting right here against our vocal cords. And when we gargle, or we sing, we hum, it impacts that vagus nerve to help soothe the nervous system. So if you've ever felt, especially here in church when you're singing, you feel at peace?
Yes.
There is a neurological, biological reason.
Wow.
Okay? One of the ways that can help you get to that optimal zone. Now, this can change depending on the time of year, and I mention that because we are New Englanders. We have the privilege of living in Connecticut, where you walk outside sometimes at like 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it is dark outside. Street lights are all on. Right. Last night when I'm getting out of my office, I was like, ooh, feels like 8, but it's not. It's 5. I say that because our brain and body, even if we don't subconsciously realize, our brain and body recognizes that something's different about our environment, which means that we don't typically have access to the tools that we might have, right? So people who like to go walking outside, open up their windows, get some sunshine in. We don't have access to those tools this time of year. So that window of tolerance, that optimal zone, actually gets a little bit smaller. I mention that because this is the time of year as New Englanders, we have to be creative. Even if you go outside, you sit on your back porch for 5 minutes, that does a world of a difference than being cooped up all day. You're getting that fresh air. Also, another call to action I'm going to give you because Pastor Larry told me I have to. Extreme temperature changes can immediately soothe the nervous system. So this time of year, while it's not the best time to be outside, I look at it as a gift. So if I am dysregulated, right, might have an argument pop up in some sort of political conversation on Thanksgiving, I have to shut down. It's going to use a lot of energy for me. I go outside. That immediate temperature change is going to soothe your nervous system, okay? Might take a little bit depending on how reactive or how big that optimal zone is. Some people, again, because of their nervous system, might only need 1 minute outside. Some might need 10. Just because you need a little bit longer does not mean there's anything wrong with you. It's just how your nervous system is hardwired. And I look at that as a beautiful thing because we are all very different. All right, next slide, friends. This is the one I've been wanting to get to. So Brain Science Simplified. I'm going to educate you so that you can empower yourself, you can advocate for yourself whether it is for your own mental health or that of a family member.